Awesome. Thank you, Trisha. I'll switch my screen. All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thanks for joining. Like Trisha said, I'm Ray. I am the clerk on the steering committee. And today I'm giving one of my workshop webinars, which is practicing giving and receiving mindful feedback. As a few of you, I recognize some of your names. If you've worked with me, you might know I love feedback. I think it is um, awesome in general, but I also know that I'm kind of like that outlier that I also like receiving feedback. And so I hope to kind of use this as like a, you know, depending on where you're at in your journey of using kind of reframing your outlook on what it means to give and receive feedback. Because typically, I know most people might associate feedback with being like negative and bad only. All right. So just a quick agenda. I'm gonna go through a quick intro, goals, expectations, and then I'm gonna start with receiving feedback first, and then kind of ties in with giving feedback. And then we have a kind of practice session at the end. I know Trisha shared the SWMS webinar expectations, so I wanted to reiterate just a couple for this session as well. So lessons leave and stories stay. If you've done a workshop with me before, you might know I like interactions. So we're gonna have like some like Mentimeter polls, things, times where people can share, uh, you know, voluntarily if you would like to participate. So we want to encourage that. So just remember that lessons leave and specific stories stay. I want to hold an accountable space. Um, so anything of, if you ask uh, a question to me via the chat and I'm unable to read it, and I say I'll get back to it at the end, make sure hold myself and feel free to hold me accountable that I want to make sure I address that before the end of the time if I can. Um, I to note it on the slides here, there's a couple that might be like tech heavy, but are more for not tech heavy, text heavy, but are more for reference opposed to reading. So if you see the teal star, this like blue green color, um, that is kind of like a uh, heads up of a participation or interactive or reflection, kind of like an activity side. And then lastly, just keeping an open and reflective mind. I just have a few strategies and things that I've used I've used and some that I continue to use or kind of uh, have flexibility and making it work best for whatever situation. And so maybe not every single strategy works for you in a specific like project presentation, but maybe there might be things that you can like pick and choose from or like I've never thought of it that way, and be able to take those smaller things into your practice. All right. Some things to consider kind of going in um, to a feedback session as I kind of do internal reflection is a big part of my work. So sometimes I frame them as questions. So this is for myself. If I'm in a newer situation, so this first question, who's able to ask for / give feedback? Am I in a work setting that's like power dynamic? Am I able to give that person feedback pretty like candidly, or do I need to kind of filter how I say things? And kind of vice versa. So if I'm supervising someone, is there, certain wording or things that I should be mindful of? Um, the next one, what past experiences or training have you been given or provided or encouraged to attend? Again, a lot of I'm currently in my mid career. So a lot of my examples that I'm going to say orally might be more work centered, but this could also be like graduate student to advisor or peer to peer. And for the second question, it helps for me to kind of put my mindset in like the culture. So like if I'm providing feedback for a conference abstract opposed to a like team 10-minute presentation, how I go about those feedback might be different. The third one, where are you now in your personal professional journey? I always just like to do a well-being check of like if I'm already tense and pretty anxious and snippy about maybe this ongoing project is just snowballing and everything's going wrong. And then my team decides, let's do a feedback session today only on constructive feedback. We're probably not going to get a lot done. So trying to be mindful of like, oh, maybe we can talk about, what are the things um uh that were like highlighted or kind of the base that is, positive, and then we'll save a whole other section for getting our mindset ready for constructive feedback. So kind of doing an internal check. And then lastly, what perspectives may be missing, especially if we're going like between people, so interpersonal. So I have like for my practice of being really reflective and mindful, there's still, this is through my perspectives as like as interdisciplinary as I am, of like I'm uh, uh, a woman of color, I'm also disabled. Um, I'm also on like the uh, younger generation in like management. And so I kind of have all these like overlapping things that I can see myself being like, I am really wide open and mindful, but I'm still like everyone has biases. So I'm always trying to be mindful of what perspectives I'm missing when I'm, thinking before I say. So that just kind of lays the backdrop. One thing I wanted to share is my background is in uh, informal education. So currently I work with college students on internship programs in NOAA ocean exploration and kind of across universities. And so I'm kind of back in the formal side of education, but this is called reflecting on practice. If you've been in the informal education world of ocean sciences, you may have heard this of called ROPs. Um, and so this is rooted in a lot of what I do. And so this is just a snippet from the actual page you can learn more about. But a key thing I wanted to show here is why it's important of like if you're in these positions of like education, which same thing if like if you were a current student as well, um, like to continually learning as you are researching on like how to um, like reflect on your own teaching and communication. And so it's like you're not only communicating, but you're like reflecting on the actual practice of communicating. So it does take time and definitely like that extra energy. And so the 2 points here are reflecting on practice means to engage practitioners in the habits of reflection, including observing their own teaching, which could also be presenting or public speaking, as a means to develop their practice and uh, make it public. And then the second one is to nurture a tradition of continued professional learning among participants and thereby build a professional learning community. And I like to use that second one as, again, like a using it as a project or situation dependent, right? Because it could be a one time I'm asking for feedback on my poster that I'm presenting at OSM. So entering, maybe you come to our SWMS feedback session, and us all coming in and knowing that we want this to be a learning community. It's kind of setting that as like the expectations. Um, and same thing at work. Maybe you're always building projects together or like presentation work. So having this kind of incorporated in your practice um, kind of makes it not as daunting. All right. So we got our first teal star. We're gonna kick off with a Mentimeter. If you've not used it, it is just a interactive survey. You could do it on your computer or your phone. If you have, you can scan the QR code or enter that link. All right. And I'm going to switch my screen. You'll still be able to join. All right, the screen is back up so you can scan that QR code. Practice tapping the heart to make sure you're in. Sweet. All right, and if you're still loading, you can join pretty much at any point in here. But I'll put the first question up just so you have some time to think about it. But on your device, you'll get this first prompt. And so we're going to think about the a feedback that you received and that really stuck with you. So it could be very positive, it could just be like a neutral feedback that you got, really negative, kind of all over. And to the best of your ability, quote the parts of that feedback that stuck with you. If there was like a certain phrase or something that someone said to you, and that is the piece that stuck with you. So I'll give you a minute. I'll go on mute. You can submit multiple times. If the question did not pop up for you immediately, like it did with mine, you just press that next button that's above the heart, and then you can start typing. And as you're submitting on Mentimeter, it pops up the answers live. So you can also switch between looking at your phone and the screen and kind of see what everyone is submitting. Feel free to keep typing if you're working on your last response, but I'm going to slowly scroll up and down just so you're able to see all of them. And feel free either in the chat or if you want to raise your hand, if anyone had any reflections that they wanted to share either on the one that you submitted or as you kind of read our groups as a whole. think my first immediate reflection for the positives that I'm seeing, there seems like to be a theme of like gratitude coming out, which is really neat. Any last thoughts before we go to the next question? Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, Katie.
Yeah, one of them that really stuck out to me was something that I've identified with that I couldn't exactly quote is that one in the top left, you have the content, but the flow is out of order. That's
Mm,
something that I
mm.
run into quite a bit. Like I have all the ideas there, like all the pieces are there, they're just in the wrong order.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I had a few that I'm like, oh yeah, that resonates. Thank you. All right, so kind of hold the responses that you just put in this first question, and we are going to go to the next question. So next one is with feedback, because we're human, there's usually feelings that are paired with it. So in the background, you'll kind of see this picture. I use this as a tool working with students, uh, and this is called a emotion wheel, but it's just to kind of help if you have like a general word that you're looking for, but can't quite get that specific feeling out. You can kind of look at the uncomfortable emotions, comfortable emotion side, and be like, instead of excited, it was more aligned with like surprised, or doesn't have to be a word on here, but kind of gets your mind going. I like to use this, especially at the end of a long day. Sometimes works with all ages. You're like, "How is your day?" And they're like, "Fine." This kind of gives you a little bit more words to work with. But so thinking about those feedback that you that were like at the forefront of your mind in that last question, how did receiving that piece of feedback make you feel? And I'll give you another minute, and you get multiple responses for this one as well. If your phone did not go to the next screen, there is a button at the bottom that says next question. Thank you. I see that some of the responses starting to slow down. And so this is a word cloud. And so how word clouds work, if you've not worked with one before, is that the bigger the words and the more towards the center is that it has popped up multiple times for different respondents. And so that's not to say that the words on the outside, outskirts and smaller aren't as important, just might not have been entered as much. So I see the first like four that are big for me are deflated, proud, respected, and abandoned. Um, and so really cool reading through these. Um, but before I kind of go through my thoughts, anyone want to share any initial reflections, just kind of looking at our word cloud together? And it's okay. It doesn't need to be like a finished thought. If it's just like something that sticks out to you, a word that sticks out to you, a theme, feel free in the chat or unmute.
I can say something. Even just looking at the previous question, it's kind of disheartening to borrow one of the words on here to see that most of the feedback we get is incredibly negative and makes us feel that way.
For sure. Thank you.
I feel like I kind of see a dichotomy of, um, yeah, it's either kind of supportive or it's very supportive or it's very not supportive. And maybe finding some ways to give feedback that's not quite either or black or white would be helpful.
Definitely. I like that. Thanks, Trisha. And then in the chat, we got a reflection seeing themes of power and power dynamics. Oh, definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you all. This kind of kicks us off of just seeing where everyone is coming from. Again, doing like an internal check of like feedback that you may be used to or trained on, or really, I like this uh more or less icebreaker type question because like Trisha was saying, a lot of times when we think of feedback, it's gonna be that extreme sides of like, wow, you suck. And then being like, I'm grateful for every single thing that you did today. And so those really, really, you know, uh, strong emotional pull ones, I think, are the ones that kind of like sit with us. Um, but then, kind of that follow up question is, do you also think those are the most effective? So I'm gonna switch back to my PowerPoint. All right, so the goals of today, again, this is more of a workshop webinar, so providing some strategies for you to try out, and if they kind of help kick into gear some of your reflective um, practices for yourself, feel free to like pick and choose. Be open and grow to feel confident in yourself when receiving feedback, and being open and mindful of others when you are giving them feedback, and then work together when improving upon a project or skill. And so hopefully there's going to be some pieces in here that um, sound like uh, uh, you know, more or less common sense, but I've also done this training with higher ups, and it could be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So it's always good to just kind of uh, get a shared understanding. All right, so we're going to start with the receiving feedback side. And once we get to the giving feedback, they still tie closely together. All right. So this is a reflection. You can either, internally, if you haven't paused to think about it, or if you don't mind, you can share it on the chat as well. But if you just take a pause, as of like right now, right, it could change in your lifetime. And if I was in school versus right now, I'm like 7 years into my career. Do you prefer to have feedback written or oral form, so via email, on a paper, or having like a one-on-one meeting, someone saying it to your face? Does it depend? So kind of take a pause and think about you specifically. What is your feedback preference? Awesome. Thank you for see a couple reflections. Sweet. Thank you. And then again, because like preferences are going to be personal as well. I'm definitely a does it depend person, and I'll kind of go into my preferences in just a bit. But it's cool even just to see our group of folks that are joining us today. There's already a diversity in how people like to receive feedback. So I always like to use these opportunities to check in. Like I work with a pretty small team, and so even though we have worked together for a few years, it's always double checking of like, hey, maybe their preferences have changed as well. So doing a one-on-one sidebar conversation to them might be more stressful now for whatever reasons. And so maybe doing a preemptive email is now what they prefer. All right. So this is a pretty basic activity to, I just do this internally now, but it could be like, if it helps you process like journaling style first. But this is a tool that could be used in school settings to work settings. And this is a reflection on the feedback received. So this is like you actually got feedback, whether it be oral or written. And then it's like, what do you do with that? So the first is just to check in. What do I feel about this feedback? Because it does sound like it's a silly question, especially if I'm thinking about like I just had a meeting with some like quote unquote top dogs in the funding organization that I work with, and I'm like checking in with my feelings. It is important for me. That's how I process. Is like, hey, that was a really tense meeting. I don't think I'm in the right brain space to actually think about the feedback that they gave me. So that might give me like the okay or the pause to like keep going. And then that gives me the agency of like, okay, what do I actually think about this feedback? There's pieces where I could be like, hey, that's really valid. Like I totally overlooked that. And then there could be a piece where I'm like, they didn't read the rest of my email. So they may have missed that. And that's okay. So putting kind of like my feelings on this separate first layer, and then thinking about the actual core, the content of that feedback. And then the last part, which is the important piece, is what is based on this feedback, what actions am I now taking to improve my work for another task or assignment. And this kind of works two ways. So it's like, did the person give me the type of constructive feedback that I can now implement into my work? Or was it, you know, did I leave more confused and then I have to then go ask them about what parts I actually need to improve on? So it's kind of like making sure you're actively taking a part in like the feedback, opposed to letting it just kind of be said to you or like come at you, if that makes sense. This is a I call this an external example. So this was like a uh, educator, an educator giving a sheet to externally reflect for a student. And so one thing I like to note here is that it does seem very uh, like, I don't know if structured's the right word, but like if I was going to turn this into my teacher afterwards, I might not put my whole thoughts down. So it's like in this first one is saying like, I feel like this feedback's useful, because maybe they did not want to like hurt the teacher's feelings. And then what did they actually think about this? I think this feedback's valid, and based on this feedback, what actions can I take to improve? And so they wrote down, physically, here's my next steps. um, and so I take this like I think the external sheet can be useful in certain settings. Um, but depending on like the purpose, I definitely advocate for that personal reflection first, because it's being open about it too, right? Because um, I love like my work team dynamic. We have very like open, transparent conversations. So we might walk away from a really tense meeting and being like, that really sucked. And I'm like, yep, it did. That hurt my feelings. And then we just kind of like have to sit with that for a little bit and then be like, all right, we could plan our next meeting so and so to talk about the content. So just taking a pause on reflection. I think this is the last part of just the intro. But this is a wording tool that is just used in, you might hear it in like relationship building as well, but shifting focus on what, not who. So like you and me versus the problem. If you've heard in like relationship counseling, the team and I are creating the best project, and the reviewer and I are improving upon the presentation. And this kind of shifts and reframes the feedback. So like for me, I do a lot of public speaking, and at the beginning, it is hard to like being able to be like, I just talked for 45 minutes, and then people are going to give me feedback on how I am talking. And that feels very personal, but it really isn't. Like it at the core, for me, I reframe that. And for me now, it's like the reviewer and I are improving upon this presentation. So like this specific presentation that I gave, I'm getting uh, constructive feedback to improve it. And so I've kind of taken that off of me. Like they're not criticizing like me as a person. And so that has been one helpful tool for my mindset that has helped me. And then go back. And then similarly, the helpful assumptions to make, which again are not always going to be true, especially if you're in like those toxic power dynamics in like non, uh, safe spaces. So this is not like a catch-all, but if you are, just working on how to receive feedback from a a baseline standpoint, so not, having that again toxic aspect. um, so assumptions that I make: the reviewer wants to support you in creating the product, so whatever they're saying is more reflective of them and how it actually gets said, but what they're saying, they want to support that finished product. Feedback on that actual project, positive, neutral, negative, is not a reflective of who you are like as a person in your core or your worth, like that productivity. So again, for me it's helpful to have that like one layer removed, like it is not me as a person. And then for me, I can be great at my job like currently and still have room to further grow my skill set and expertise. So taking away that extremities, the like black and white, like, oh, I got one feedback, I must suck at my job. No, anyone at any point of your career, you should still be giving and receiving feedback. So um just kind of like the assumptions, but I think in my mind is also just that other layer of mindfulness. All right. So that kind of helps seed us into our giving feedback and meshing them together. So I'll just take a quick pause. If anyone has any thoughts or points to kind of make sure we touch on in this last half of the session before we go to some actual practice. And feel free unmute or use the chat box as well. Sweet. All right, well, to start the giving feedback portion, I like to play, this is just a 5-minute clip on giving great feedback the TED Talks series had like a professional development, like short clips. And I'll play this, and also I see a couple questions coming through. So let me play this, and let me share sound. All right, here we go. Oops.
If you look at like a carpenter, they have a toolbox. A dentist, they have their drills. In our era and the type of work most of us are doing, the tool we most need is actually centered around being able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we're still pretty bad at it. In fact, a recent Gallup survey found that only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work. Those numbers are pretty dismal. So what's going on? The way that most people give their feedback actually isn't brain friendly. People fall into one of two camps. Either they're of the camp that is very indirect and soft, and the brain doesn't even recognize that feedback is being given, or it's just simply confused. Or they fall into the other camp of being too direct. And with that, it tips the other person into the land of being defensive. There's this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we'll move forward in defensive,ness, or we'll move backwards in retreat. And what happens is the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add more ums and ahs and justifications, and the whole thing gets wonky really fast. It doesn't have to be this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking who here is a great feedback giver. Anybody who's named again and again, we actually bring into our labs to see what they're doing differently. What we find is that there's a 4-part formula that you can use to say any difficult message well. Okay, are you ready for it? Here we go. The first part of the formula is what we call the micro yes. Great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that feedback is actually coming. It would be something, for example, like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about how that last conversation went? Or I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Can I share them with you? This micro yes question does 2 things for you. First of all, it's going to be a pacing tool. It lets the other person know that feedback is about to be given. And the second thing it does is it creates a moment of buy-in. I can say yes or no to that yes or no question. And with that, I get a feeling of autonomy. The second part of the feedback formula is going to be giving your data point. Here you should name specifically what you saw or heard and cut out any words that aren't objective. There's a concept we call blur words. A blur word is something that can mean different things to different people. Blur words are things that are not specific. So for example, if I say, you shouldn't be so defensive, or you could be more proactive. What we see great feedback givers doing differently is they'll convert their blur words into actual data points. So for example, instead of saying, you know, you aren't reliable, we would say, you said you'd get that email to me by 11, and I still don't have it yet. Specificity is also important when it comes to positive feedback. And the reason for that is that we want to be able to specify exactly what we want the other person to increase or diminish. And if we stick with blur words, they actually won't have any clue particularly what to do going forward to keep repeating that behavior. The third part of the feedback formula is the impact statement. Here you name exactly how that data point impacted you. So for example, I might say, because I didn't get the message, I was blocked on my work and couldn't move forward. Or, I really liked how you added those stories because it helped me grasp the concepts faster. It gives you a sense of purpose and meaning and logic between the points, which is something the brain really craves. The fourth part of the feedback formula is a question. Great feedback givers wrap their feedback message with a question. They'll ask something like, well, how do you see it? Or, this is what I'm thinking we should do. But what are your thoughts on it? What it does is it creates commitment rather than just compliance. It makes the conversation no longer be a monologue, but rather becomes a joint problem-solving situation. But there's one last thing. Great feedback givers not only can say messages well, but also they ask for feedback regularly. In fact, our research on perceived leadership shows that you shouldn't wait for feedback to be given to you, what we call push feedback, but rather you should actively ask for feedback, what we call pulling feedback. Pulling feedback establishes you as a continual learner and puts the power in your hands. The most challenging situations are actually the ones that call for the most skillful feedback. But it doesn't have to be hard. Now that you know this 4-part formula, you can mix and match it to make it work for any difficult conversation.
And if you are a note taker, here's this quick recap if you wanted those major points while I kind of do a little review. But the 4 pieces here, and again, you might have heard them in different ways before, but in this framework, it's the 1, the micro yes, 2, data point, 3, impact, and 4, end on a question. The 2 big ones that I would definitely encourage are the 1 and the 4, because I feel like those are the ones that kind of get missed, right? People might jump straight to the data point, and like that video showed, if you have a person you work with that comes to mind, this is like a previous coworker from a job a while ago, would just kind of like bust through the door and then start giving me like thoughts on a presentation that I gave like 2 weeks ago. I'd be like, whoa, I don't even know what you're talking about. So having that like setting up to be in the right frame of mind for the feedback definitely is a big one. And then the 4 is the ending on a question. This is a really big thing for what I do in my practice, is that like I am not an expert on everything, right? Like our SWMS community guidelines is like, together we know a lot. So if like, here's my perspective on it. The framework that we'll be practicing today is called the I Wonder framework. And so it's leaving it on that question of like, this is what I noticed. And so I wonder if blah, 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 because this is what I think could work here, but maybe you're the one who's actually giving the presentation and you know the content more than me. So at the end of the day, you still have like your perspective and insight in that project as well. And so that line at the end, which is that teamwork aspect opposed to that like communication dialogue opposed to compliance, is really big. All right, and that bonus thing that they added right at the end is that you are encouraged to ask for feedback often. And I pretty much preach this all the time. And this could be seen in so many ways. If you have ever done a annual work culture survey at a work, if you've done a conference survey at the end of a week-long conference, an annual review of your advisor mentee relationship. When it's really long, again, like a conference, a week is not as long in retrospect, but especially with those annual reviews, of like waiting until the very last second to ask for feedback. For me, I feel like it feels like all this negative stuff just like randomly comes out of nowhere, because we haven't really talked about feedback that whole year, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I didn't know that was happening. That's what we should be aiming not to do. But encouraging to ask for feedback often doesn't need to be like a formal sit down, do my worker review every single week. but like the video said, is like not waiting or expecting to be approached to get feedback, is like being, again, taking that active part of the feedback. So some examples, these are ones that I actually use, and so there's probably a bunch more, but these are the ones that I could think of that are pretty much, daily, if not weekly. But looking for feedback can be as like just opening a dialogue. So if I have action-oriented emails, let me know your thoughts of like me telling the recipient of like I'm not just sending you this just to send it to you. I actually would like your response to this. Open to suggestions if I had just sent out this brainstorming document. I look forward to reviewing your initial feedback. So if we have maybe more of a formal annual report due, and then this might be more of a request that's a little bit more formal in writing. If I have in-person meetings, please let me know if you have any additional information to add or changes you'd like to suggest in this PowerPoint. Like maybe I just finished practicing a PowerPoint that I'm giving. And then if there is, maybe a deeper conversation, like, hey, could we schedule an additional meeting time to review XYZ offline together? And that could be me asking for feedback, or same thing, me giving feedback as well. So just making sure that there's an action. I think in the questions, yes, okay. I had one question on any reflections on feedback from a perspective of an employer when you didn't get a job offer. Yes, I have two thoughts on that. In my most recent, and kind of I guess all of my job, whenever I'm in the job searching parts of my journey, is that I like taking the active approach, which again, depending on the feel of the interview, maybe it's really, really short and they're like, you only have 15 minutes. Maybe there's not time for questions in that live interaction. Typically they do. They usually give you a space to ask one or two questions at the end. I will tell you, in every single interview that I get, I will always ask for live feedback. And I phrase it in an open tone. So for me, at the end, they're, usually like, thank you, it was great meeting you. Do you have any questions for us? And if I have logistical questions, I ask those first. And then I always end with, for my personal development and growth, I'm always looking for ways to improve my skill set. And I'd love to hear any of your feedback or thoughts on how I could improve um, improve on this interview. Something like that. So something of like an open invitation that they are, again, they're not morally obligated to give me that, but I always ask and I get really cool things back of like, whoa, like thanks, you're very like inquisitive. I get that a lot of how many questions I ask. And the second part of that question of when you didn't get the job offer, sometimes unfortunately that part is a numbers game. So especially if they write back in that email of like, we had over hundreds of people apply. I apologize if we can't get back to you with individual emails. Some will say that kind of just off the bat, because that might just be a team of one doing the emails and they might not be able to give you that in-depth feedback. And that's okay. Unfortunately, not everyone's going to be able to give you the reflective type of feedback that I think is most effective. And so that's where multiple sources is definitely beneficial. So it's like, if I just applied to a like consultant type job and I didn't get it, maybe I ask a friend or a colleague who is a consultant and ask their opinion on my resume or CV. And so maybe, not taking it as like that one HR person or that one person doing the screening could give me very helpful feedback, but they might not be like able to capacity wise. And I see, let's see. And the second one I see, oh, from Trisha, if we're scared to ask because we don't know what they'll say, and that's just totally, it's valid. that's the feelings part of the like checking in. Um, for me, I think it again ends with that action of like uh so in this case, if we're all getting set up for like OSM and I'm delivering, which is true, I now have a OSM poster for my job. And I'm delivering a poster presentation on behalf of my team and the work that we do. And I could be, working on this poster for the next 2 months straight and giving it my all. At the end of the day, I still need to get their thoughts because it is representing this teamwork. Um, and it's hard to be like, hey, I worked my butt off for the last 2 months, and they could still out of left field be like, this is a horrible poster, which could be like, maybe I wasn't thinking straight. But that's the worst case scenario. That's most likely not going to happen. So the part to kind of get through that I found most helpful is definitely taking those baby steps of asking. So maybe in my case, if I have this whole poster, which with me and my team, I'm just going to send them the whole poster because we're on that communication level. If you're not in that communication level, if there's not a brave space for you to be like vulnerable and ask for improvement, you can ask for specifics. So maybe you finished just the abstract and introduction. And so you can send this chunk to your team and be like, I am working towards completing my final OSM poster. Could I get your feedback on the introduction by the end of January? Something as like specific and timeline to kind of make it less daunting. That could be helpful if breaking it down into smaller pieces help. But definitely for the feelings part for me was to remove myself from it. So it's like one of the strategies we'll use has that piece there. Good questions. All right. I know a few of you have already been sharing, but if there's any other thoughts, feel free to put it in the chat. Other ways that you can ask for feedback, right? Those were just some of the examples that came to my head. Is there any other examples that you all ask, or as you read through mine, be like, oh, wait, I do ask for feedback? Other ways that, could be more formal, less formal, on a daily basis. Or if you'd like to answer, like, how can you utilize the 4-part giving feedback formula? And like, I'll say, like, I saw that video first in one of my science communication courses. And so I was able to see that and be like, oh, I already do the question part. I didn't realize that that was a key part. But sometimes, like, especially if I'm really excited, I forget about that first step, where I sometimes am super excited and be like, let's talk about that presentation. And then, maybe the interns I'm working with are like, whoa, can I get a lunch break? And I'm like, oh yeah, go eat lunch first. So taking a pause and looking at, how you think you can best use that. So feel free if you want to put in the chat or unmute any reflections. Definitely. And thank you. I see some of the direct messages as well. Appreciate. Awesome. And I know a few people put this in the chat earlier, but just kind of always being mindful. So a lot of my work is rooted in equity and belonging and inclusivity. And so this phrase kind of goes all across the board, but intent does not equal impact. And intent is like on and in you, right? It's like how you interpret something, how that person or sorry, intent is like intended. So like I intended to say a really nice thing or a really nice compliment, or I picked my words carefully because or not carefully. And then the impact is how you that person might take that feedback or thoughts. Oh, thank you all for putting, I see those specifics in the chat. That's awesome. All right. And I know a few people asked for some specific examples. Since I have, these are case studies, and I say case studies because this is from me specifically. So I am not bashing on these methods, but this is for me and my feedback, how feedback misalignment happened. And so you might be familiar with the first one, which people call like the sandwich or the Oreo. For my learning, the sandwich of like praise, criticism, praise, depending how it's given, is really confusing for me. So, for example, like if I just finished, let's just say I just finished a workshop, and then out of like, nowhere, someone was like, oh, like I really like your hair. And then, but I don't agree with blah, 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 blah. But you do talk really well. And at the end of the sentence, I'd have to then pause and try to figure out what they were trying to tell me because it was unclear. But there could be parts, like different times, where it can seem like a bigger picture feedback sandwich, like one of the strategies later of like, if I got, if I asked for that, like maybe I wanted to see the highs and the lows of like my presentation style, then I'd be like actively looking for those pieces of feedback. But just kind of being mindful of like knowing like this is a feedback strategy. So being able to think critically even about the strategies, even the one that we did today, that four-part strategy is not like cut and paste for every single situation that you're going to go through. So thinking critically on like how the impact of what is being shared could be taken by the recipient. This is another one, which is like half of the sandwich, which sometimes I feel like is, I don't know if worse is the right, but maybe more confusing for me. But I call it like the warm up, but I put the little like meme over here of like trying to butter me up, of like, I don't know if anyone else have had this, but receiving a compliment and then like out of left field positive and then redirect to a constructive is a really weird parallel for me. And so I call that like warming up. I'm like, you don't have to warm me up to get to the constructive part. Like I like the constructive part. And so for me, this kind of leads to, as I kind of figured out my preferences for feedback, and I give that to my my team and working with upper management or students, and now I know that this is what I prefer. And again, it's not always possible, right, if there's timelines or things, but when we can, if there's reflective time, I love direct constructive feedback only. So I would like, if possible, those like compliments and work praise encouragements separately, because for me, it kind of looks fluffy if I'm really trying to improve something. So for this OSM poster, like me and my team are going to work on this, and they know that I just want the things that we need to like improve instead of being like, you chose a really pretty font. I don't really need that of where I am in my career, but you might. So just again, thinking about where you're at and what your preference is. And trying to communicate that with the people that, may be giving you feedback often. For me, it depends person. So if we're working on something actively, items to help me prepare or work on it during our session, super helpful. So if I'm working on a paper or abstract that I need to submit, I can just be actively doing it while we're talking instead of me sitting in a 30-minute meeting feeling like I'm being grilled on a paper that I could be writing at the same time. So try to make it effective as well. I prefer written if it's like for logical or workflow fixes. So again, like typing, data, anything that is like, I can immediately see their email and do it. That's written is my preference. Again, I kind of take the tone out of that because I'm asking for this project or whatever it is. For performance or interpersonal improvements, I do prefer in person. So if it's like my annual review, I like that one-on-one, being able to talk it through with, if it's a boss or the person I'm supervising. And then, like I said previously, like how I work in my team's flow is like there could be a separate brainstorming session of getting like our, those positives that setting the groundwork meeting could be a whole other meeting. And then maybe after that presentation or the poster or the practice, having a dedicated set time, knowing like we're going into this and this is going to be a working meeting and we are going to be kind of doing all the constructive feedbacks and implementing those changes. So this is just an example of how specific I am now, but again, not everyone's able or have the capacity to, depending on the dynamics of where we're asking for feedback. The last thing I like to share is, I know it's not always possible, but the anonymous candid feedback is so valuable. And so I see a couple like professors were sharing, like if you had student feedback, which typically is anonymous at the end, and it's just good to think about, like, is there a safe, productive space to give and receive constructive feedback with absolutely no repercussions? And I put absolutely because, again, we all have biases. And so being, even me wanting to foster a mindful and transparent work culture, it's like I still have, supervisor managerial duties over some people. And so there, whether I like it or not, there's power dynamics. So do they have another person to give feedback to that is not me? Like if they need to give feedback about me, then they need to know those lines of communication. And then maybe if it's a survey or if it's written or you're, collecting that feedback, how is it addressed or followed up with actions? So does it, go anywhere or does it like go into the trash can? I always ask this about, work culture annual surveys because there is a study, I did not link it here, but it's like who fills out, work culture surveys, and then another percentage of like who feels that their answers actually make a difference, and it is very, very low because that there is not action taken after you receive that. One ways to do that proactively is, I put some examples for like peer-reviewed papers and abstracts. They might tell you up front, this is an anonymous peer-reviewed jury or, session. Work culture surveys, making sure that they're available up and laterally. So if you're being able to review like supervisors or your advisor and like your peers. An example that I have very recently, I am a part of a inclusive leadership program with Cecily, and we actually just had to do this. This is a super extreme example, but I personally loved it. It's called the QMCA Emotional Intelligence Assessment, and I really loved this opportunity. Essentially, I filled out a emotional intelligence survey about myself, and then you had to send it to at least 5 other people that you work with or interact with on a regular basis, and they rank you in those same questions. And they also get to give you anonymous, candid feedback. And I got the survey and I was so excited. I like sent it out to like 30 people immediately. Because again, I love feedback because for me it's reframing of like, are my actions and like the work that I'm putting out reflective of what my intentions are. But then talking to like some of my colleagues, of like some were sharing that maybe this was like a really scary exercise for them because they felt like people were really ranking them, like ranking you as a person. And it's hard because this was specifically about emotional intelligence. And I'm sharing these are my results, which I thought was kind of cool. The blue means my oh, sorry. Blue means the rater average, so all of the people that answered the survey. And then orange is the myself. And so it was really cool to see the two that I picked that ended up averaging higher were self-awareness and teamwork. And in my brain, I'm like, oh, I'm a good team leader. And I have high self-awareness because I work in all this mindful spaces. And I actually put all of the rest, self-control, adaptability, achievement, orientation lower. And it was cool to see it flipped. And this is just the data points. So I also had their candid reviews of me, and being able to see that and the candid reviews was so eye-opening. And the big things here were like teamwork and self-awareness. I most definitely answered this survey thinking of my team. So I thought about like how I am as a leader, how I work with people as a community, all this stuff. And the biggest feedback that I got is that like Ray forgets to check in on herself. And so, you know, knowing that that also leaks into the team dynamic. And I was like, whoa, I forget to pause sometimes and do that. So being able to just ask for that was really, really important for this program that I'm in. And so this is a specific assessment. We did this for the program, but I think there are different ones. But, you know, in a different scale of using if there's your, you know, your annual or quarterly review, being able to see that feedback and the way that I proactively um, address the actions for this is beforehand. So while I sent them the directions was that I am using your honest feedback in my like personal and professional development. So this is like, thank you for contributing to, like, I will be actively reading all of your insights. And so that was kind of like a proactive approach instead of following up individually because they submitted it anonymously. Awesome. All right. And in this last, I think we have like 12 minutes, we're ending with the mindful feedback exercises. So this is some of the practices. But as I'm getting this part set up, any other thoughts for the giving feedback? I see a couple that I'm hopefully going to address in this next section. That's awesome. All right. And if you are a note taker or a screenshot or person, sorry, end of the day, my words are failing. Feel free, these are going to be more of like the strategies. So if you want to take a quick screen grab or you know, jot them down, this is going to be more of the strategy section. So as a review from the earlier thoughts of like reviewing the what, not the who, this is a practice that I did in actually one of my college courses, which was called the Communicating Ocean Sciences to Informal Audiences. And it's a silly practice, but it really like makes you rethink. And so the first two I still use. So instead of saying, like, if you just gave me your presentation, we just practiced for OSM. Instead of saying your presentation or your writing or your slide or your research, Instead of dropping that hard your every single time, it really makes it personal. Like, as much as I don't mean it to be personal, just hearing like your, or if I use your name, like Katie, your research, or Trisha, your presentation was, it just all of a sudden makes it very personal. Sometimes I don't want to like kind of jump into that. So instead, I try to do the what. So it's like the presentation or like the language used here. Um, and I still use those. You know, there's sometimes you can't help but use your, right? Like if I'm doing a public speaking uh practice, you're gonna have to talk about like their speaking. Um, but a bonus reflection exercise, this is the one that if we were doing an in-person workshop, this is a fun one to practice. But you can say it, you know, to yourself as a self exercise. But instead of using names, um, sometimes you can have a mediator, especially if you're doing like a group reflection. I've done an exercise where um, in my research lab, there's like 5 of us that had to practice for an upcoming conference. And so we all just kind of like take turns presenting. And, you know, if you're in a really, you know, everyone's in a really tense or vulnerable spot, sometimes it's just really hard to hear feedback directed at you. So there's an exercise where instead of people talking to me about my presentation, maybe there is a mediator. So maybe I have my friend stand up there and people are telling them my feedback as I'm writing it, like at a desk or something. And so I'd be like, I noticed the speaker like went quickly through the introduction, but I didn't quite get like the gist of the experiment. Like, I wonder if they could kind of go more into detail about that. So having someone say that to a different entity is a fun exercise of being like hearing yourself in third person opposed to hearing it directly as a first person, kind of on that defensive. So that's a fun strategy. It is awkward and silly, but it makes it kind of cool of like someone is taking that like the brunt, if you will, of the feedback sting, even though it's like not about them, as you just get to process and write it down. Um, this one is just a quick one. So I'll just have you like to yourself on mute. Just say this out loud, but fill in the blank with your name. So I'm reading it as Ray. I noticed you move your feet around a lot as you presented this lesson. Is this the first time you taught this lesson? Let's try it again and be mindful of when you feel nervous, you can try to stay still. So take a second, say your name, and read that feedback to yourself. Cool. And I'm going to put the second one up. And go ahead and read that one to yourself out loud too. And since we're running a little short on time, I'll save some of these bonus reflections for the end. But just kind of thinking about, are either of these inherently better? Do they feel better when like you said them out loud? Does it depend when you use them? How would it feel to receive these pieces of feedback? So, you know, neither of one are inherently better than each other, but the first one are heavily on you statements. And the second one is more about the what. There could be like a mix and match, but just kind of hearing the difference of what those two sounded like side by side. They're talking about the same thing, but how they were said came out differently. So things to think of. This is the last strategy that I wanted to share today. Oh, and thank you. I like seeing your preferences. Um, if you have taught informal or formal ed, you might have seen this before in different ways as like a see, think, wonder chart, or I see, I think, I wonder. This framework is used in a bunch of contexts. So if it's like learning about scientific experiments for the first time to, learning just like a K through 12 lesson to reflecting on research. So I still use this in my practice and I kind of adapted it to feedback. So this is one that I use pretty much internally every single week, and then pretty formally and explicitly if it's giving feedback for someone who is asking for feedback. So I work a lot with 10-week internship programs, and at the end, they are developing their research presentation skills. So this is a formal like piece of presentation feedback that I can give them. Essentially, this is think before you speak, just broken down into detailed steps. So I put it in more the scientific usage. So it's the I notice, your observations, I think, and I wonder. So for example, if I was listening to your presentation, I fill out only the first 2 columns during your presentation. So I'm not even in the I wonder. So I noticed during the presentation, I think during the presentation, maybe other thoughts pop up after. And then the I wonder, I do a reflection after. And so I'll kind of go through details of what that looks like. So in the I notice, this is where I put those specific data points. There's no blur words. And this is eventually said out loud to the presenter. So I'm going to share this with you. Then I have to process, what about that am I actually trying to give them feedback on? So what is my initial feedback? Use this space to process your thoughts, suggestions to make, and impacts of those changes. This part does not necessarily need to be shared. This is like you going through the thought process of being like, ooh, maybe that does sound a little bit too harsh in this setting. So then you can like reword it. You don't have to share that column. And then lastly, the I wonder. So like I said earlier, this is how I end my question. And I just really like this framework. But the I wonder is how I'm actually going to give you that piece of feedback that I think, in my perspective, this could be an improvement. But again, you might have a different perspective coming from this. So what feedback am I actually going to give the presenter? Suggestions to be phrased as a question. And this is said aloud. So the next slide is the example. So this is one that I actually gave. And so as this person was presenting, I only filled out the first 2 columns. I was like, ooh, I noticed on slide 3 that organization's name was misspelled. So then I had to think to myself, like, what is the actual feedback about this? Like, do I just want to say on that one random slide, there is like a random typo? So I'm going to think about like the organization that they were working for is unfortunately really long and it's confusing, as is a lot of our like scientific institutions with their acronyms. So I think we could use this as a review to make sure we just double check and look at the rest of the PowerPoint for typos of the organization name. So that makes me wonder, like, okay, how I can reframe that. And this is what I would actually say to the person out loud. So I noticed on slide 3, the organization's name is misspelled. I wonder if we could take a few minutes and go through each slide and double check the spelling for this organization. And so notice like in this process, I did not have to share all of my thoughts, but I got there because I had to think about it. And so why I love this tool so much is because, I've had a bad experience, and I'm sure a lot of you have, kind of seeing our word cloud, is sometimes you get constructive feedback and it is just back to back to back to back to back to back. And maybe it's even going in circles now. Like there's no like direction or point, and maybe they just didn't stop and pause to think about like, why did I have to receive that feedback? And so I think about this going two ways, right? Like someone gave me feedback. What is the thing that I can actually leave their feedback with? And then if I'm giving you feedback, am I just saying it to say it, or do you actually get something out of it? And so that's why I go from I notice to the I wonder. Like I have, here's the data point, and here's where we leave off with the question. An example, this is more of like a full chart. Like during the session, I am actually writing these points like this chart. I either do it on a piece of paper or I print out like a blank grid and I fill it out of like, I notice, I think, I wonder, and I'm filling it out for each item. So that's the important part. This takes time because it's being mindful, takes intentional space. So I would only fill out these two. So this might be what it looks like after you just gave me a 15-minute, presentation. I might have more than 3, but I just filled out the I noticed and I got a couple thoughts in there. Then I pause maybe for 5 to 10 minutes. And then after you're done, I actually fill out my thoughts a little bit more. And then I go into the I wonders, because that gives me a chance to be ready to give you feedback also. So instead of like, here's my first initial thought that just jumped out of my head the second you stopped talking. So it gives me a chance to process as well. And so this is an example of what it could be like fully filled out. Some people like getting all of this. So I don't mind seeing thoughts if you're okay giving it to me. I don't mind getting your whole chart, but mostly for oral, like giving feedback orally, you would just say the I notice and the I wonder pieces. Oops. All right. And I think we are at the bottom of the hour. And so that is the last strategy, is that chart. Oh, and definitely I love that last chat in there. Being able to sleep on it, definitely. If there's like a significant part of the project, again, this is gonna be dependent on like the scenario and like how tense it is, or like how, is all my funding like hinging on this one thing that we're submitting. It's definitely not a 5 to 10 conversation. If I'm doing a feedback session with the student who is giving me their draft presentation, we could probably do that in 30 minutes. So figuring out like, the setting in which you're giving it and the bigger context. But yeah, I think we're at the end of our kind of structured time. So thank you all. I know you some had to head out, but I think the rest of this was recorded. I do have some time if anybody has just any kind of open reflection questions here at the end, maybe like 10-15 minutes, I can stay on. But if not, it was great seeing everyone's reflections. Thank you so much for joining us on our last SWMS webinar of the year.
I know Trish had to bounce, but I'll just say for both of us, thank you, Ray. This was so great. We both loved it. And now I want to host a SWMS mindfulness webinar. So if anyone's got any suggestions on like who to contact for that, like let me know. But yeah, I see you have some questions, Ray, so I will leave it. But if you guys have to bounce, thank you again for coming to our last webinar of the year. And we are looking forward to seeing you again in 2024.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I see Emily's hand first, and then I see a couple in the chat.
Thanks. I was just curious if you ask for more frequent feedback other than like an annual evaluation, but don't really receive it, how you can try like feedback on your performance, not necessarily like on a document or a presentation, like how to actually get your supervisor to do that.
Oh, good question. Because yeah, there's like the two pieces of that interaction of like I did my job, I did the ask, but then it's still, the other person who is reciprocating that or not reciprocating. For me, I've definitely had uh superiors in those positions of like maybe they just are overwhelmed and literally just cannot find the time of day to just pause and give you like general feedback. This is where I would encourage if it works in your dynamic, because again, depending on your workflow, but if there is a specific event or thing that you can tie it to, of like knowing like, oh, you maybe you meet every 2 weeks, and so every 2 weeks, maybe at the beginning or the end, you just always start a prompt of like, in this last week, I had those two presentations with the funders. I'd like to get your insight on that. That could be as like open book if they just need an invitation, um, and that you're already like in that space together, that dedicated space. And sometimes, unfortunately, I've had to do this too, of like taking it bite by bite, because truly it is a two person equation. So like if they don't even have capacity to think about it, it could just be as small as asking of like hey, my OSM poster is needs to be printed by next Friday. Like, please give me any final thoughts and feedback by
Mhm.
Wednesday. And if not, I will be proceeding to printing. Like sometimes it's just like you have to have an ultimatum or a deadline, and it sucks where it's like, um, again, if there's power dynamics in play, but being able to offer what you can in your realm, but without overextending yourself, because again, it's the give and take. Like you can't just be like 8 hours of your workday being like, hey, remember last Friday I asked you to give me that feedback? How are you doing on that? Like that, I've definitely had that too, where finding that balance. And so unfortunately, I don't have like it's like a non-answer, but just
Mhm.
some ways to kind of like chip away at the bigger picture. If the bigger piece is the part that's the issue.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. All right, and then have let's see. Okay, on imposter syndrome. Yes, and yes. Okay. Oh, love it. Thank you. I also got a couple of DMs with the imposter syndrome. I heard this saying from the awesome Catalina Martinez of NOAA's diversity sector, and not sector, section of ocean exploration. And it has helped me since. I still feel like that feeling of imposter syndrome is still an internal, like I still feel that. That's still a thing. But yes, love Catalina. Um, this was her uh award ceremony at URI, if anybody watched that. But she described that like imposter syndrome is is fostered through like an unsupportive environment. So like it could start, like internally, but is this environment also set up for you? And so the picture that she showed was a goldfish in a bowl, and it was like sick. And it's like, it's like, breathing in its poop and it's not clean. And it's like this environment is is creating the imposter syndrome. So it's not even set up for you. And so for me, I try to think of that as well when I ask for feedback. Especially, you might have those people that you work with or uh, past people that you can think of that are like, I didn't really ask for your opinion, but they're going to give it to you. And so under the root of that, I'm like, ouch, maybe that first part stung. Under the root of it, did it have something? Did it have oh, they're actually asking for me to turn in things earlier. They're not necessarily calling me lazy, even though it kind of sounded like they called me lazy. It's like, what is underneath that? and where's the action? And that's where, again, I think the baby steps come in, because for me, removing myself and my worth from my work is necessary for just me and my mental health. Of like, it is super scary. And I'm not saying like I love feedback, and it's still scary. Like I love being able to hear from, the people that I supervise, the students I work with, and hearing them candidly talk about things, and still hearing something that, like, oh, that didn't turn out how I wanted to. That still sucks. But like, I need to hear that to keep growing. And so that part is the part I think that really sticks with me. Um, I will say this, the scary feeling is going to be up to you, because I always tell my students safety first. So wherever you're at, whatever that means to you, is safety first. So if you can't be full vulnerable in a place that is not welcoming to you as like a full authentic individual, then maybe there's skillful ways that you need to ask for feedback. For example, I did work at a really toxic place, and it would be like, uh, I'd be asking, I used to work like in more data stuff, and they'd be like, how come you didn't turn in this, a finished Excel database, whatever. And I would have to be strategic with them, because whatever I would say, they would use it against me. So I would phrase things like, I have the finished database outline ready to go here if you'd like to look at it. I have a question on what you're looking for in this portion. So it's like, I'm already confirming that I finished the thing that you asked me to do, but you need to clarify this part. And so it sucks because that takes a lot of emotional and mental energy. So I definitely don't encourage the tiptoeing as like a go-to, but safety first always. So it's like, in that job, I was tiptoeing anywhere I could, until I could get a different job. So if that kind of answers the safety question. Sweet. And then the last part of the imposter syndrome part that I would add is that, like, it's such a small saying, but I still think like it's the thing that holds me kind of my head out of the imposter syndrome deep end, is my specific perspective is very unique and is needed. So when I give feedback and when I receive feedback, it's like I have my perspective and that's like me, but I need to hear someone else's because I might be missing something. And I need to tell them mine because maybe they're missing this. And so just being able to say, like, my perspective is blank, is really important in this research project, or is really marginalized. So that is why I need to ask for your feedback. So this could be, as amplified as whatever XYZ. So figuring out that framing to get you there, because this is one of those skills that is just not going to go away. So figuring out what your baby step is to get into it. Because I like to say, like, even noticing how like this session is called, it's not like bad feedback. You have mindful, reflective, and constructive feedback is really what it should be. But it sucks because a lot of people aren't equipped and we are receiving a lot of bad feedback. But kind of getting to the root of it is the okay, I see some constructive pieces that I can pull out of there. They might be really tense because the annual report is being due, so I'm just not going to take their feelings on emotional load on my shoulders. So it definitely is like one of those like um exposure makes, what is it? not the practice makes perfect. Like exposure makes less like traumatic, where it's like this a feedback is not a one-time event. It's now something that you're like actively seeking. And I think that's my TED Talk. I just went on a little rant. I hope that answered.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank
You're
you.
with your work. So keep up all that positive feedback so we can all learn.
Thank you.
You have a great night. Bye.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Ray. That was awesome. I loved it. And I am legitimately looking up mindfulness workshops right now. Like,
woo! I
for
let
swim
like if,
specifically, like legitimately.
Yeah, if there's just like, exercises wise, I could definitely do exercises. I'm not an expert. I'm not a super expert on it in general, but there's just like certain pieces of it. But I'm really glad I got
Apparently
some
Stony
good
Brook used to
DMs.
run one for like instructors, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could get them to run that again with the swim symposium that's gonna happen
That would be really cool.
in November. So I don't know. I'm gonna send some emails and figure this out and send some texts.
Oh, 100%. Because I straight up, I had this conversation. Oh, and we can we can pause recording for this.
Oh yes, sorry. I will trim this.